When a cocky black belt dared a quiet black woman to fight him just for fun, everyone laughed, but within seconds, the dojo went completely silent, because what she did next, no one was ready for. Welcome to Brainfuel, the place where real stories spark powerful lessons. Here, every story fuels your mind, strengthens your spirit, and reminds you what true power looks like, not loud, not arrogant, but calm, focused, and unshakable. If you believe strength begins within, hit subscribe and join the Brainfuel family, because every week we turn ordinary moments into life-changing inspiration. Now, let me take you inside a dojo where one woman's silence taught an entire room what real strength means. Come on, it's just for fun, the man laughed, his voice echoing through the polished wooden hall of Osaka Dojo. The students chuckled, some whispering to each other, others folding their arms in amusement. But when she stepped forward, calm, quiet, confident, the laughter began to fade, replaced by curiosity. That woman was Aisha Daniels, a name no one in the dojo had heard before. She was in her mid-30s, her hair tied neatly, her eyes calm but sharp, the kind of gaze that didn't need to shout to be heard. She wore no fancy gear, just simple workout clothes and a respectful smile as she stood at the entrance of the dojo. The morning sun filtered through the paper windows, painting long golden lines on the tatami mats. Inside, a group of around 15 students stretched and practiced light kicks, warming up for the Saturday session. At the center stood Sensei Hiroshi, a man in his 60s, respected across the city for his discipline and mastery. When Aisha bowed and politely asked if she could observe a class before joining, the sensei smiled warmly. Of course. Respect and patience come before strength. Please take a seat. But not everyone shared his kindness. Near the corner of the room stood Brandon Lee, a tall, muscular man in his late 20s and one of the dojo's black belts. He was known for his raw power, but also for his arrogance. In his mind, he was untouchable, the star of the dojo. He had a reputation for showing off whenever newcomers appeared, especially those he didn't take seriously. And Aisha, quiet and composed, seemed like an easy target. As the class began, Aisha sat silently, observing. She watched the students move through drills, correcting their posture in her mind, noticing small flaws, not judging, just understanding. She had done this thousands of times before in other dojos around the world. But Brandon noticed her calm eyes and mistook them for inexperience. He whispered to another student, loud enough for her to hear. She looks lost. Probably came here after watching a few karate movies. A few students snickered. Aisha didn't react. After warm-ups, Sensei Hiroshi called for light sparring. Students paired off. That's when Brandon made his move. He turned toward the sensei and said with a playful grin, "Sensei, how about we give our guest a little show? Let her experience what real training feels like." A few heads turned. The air shifted slightly. Sensei Hiroshi looked up from adjusting a student's stance. "Brandon," he said gently, "she is not a student here yet. Let's not rush." But Brandon raised his hands innocently. No, Sensei, just a friendly spar. No harm, no pride, just for fun." The others laughed. The atmosphere grew lighter, at least for them. Aisha looked up, meeting Brandon's gaze. There was no irritation in her expression, only curiosity. "I didn't come here to fight," she said softly. That should have been enough. But arrogance rarely knows when to stop. Brandon smirked, stepping closer. "Come on, just a minute. I promise not to hurt you." That line made the group burst into quiet laughter. It wasn't cruel, just a typical dojo teasing that came when someone challenged a newcomer. But the sensei's eyes narrowed. "Brandon," he said, "control yourself." Brandon smiled, pretending to obey, but everyone could see the mischief in his stance. Then Aisha stood up. Her movement was deliberate, slow, graceful, confident. She walked onto mat, bowed deeply to the sensei, then to Brandon. "All right," she said calmly. "For fun." The dojo fell silent. Something about her tone, polite but steady, made even the laughter fade. Sensei Hiroshi sighed, knowing that there was a lesson brewing, one that didn't need his interference. "Okay," he said finally, "light sparring. No ego. No full contact. Brandon grinned, bouncing on his heels, his GI rustling. "Don't worry, Sensei. I'll take it easy." Aisha didn't reply. She simply stepped into position, or so it seemed. She didn't take any traditional stance. Her hands rested gently at her sides, her knees loose, eyes focused. To the untrained eye, she looked unready. To the few who truly knew combat, she looked like water, calm before movement. The room buzzed with low whispers. "Does she even know what she's doing?" someone muttered. "She's not even guarding herself." Sensei Hiroshi folded his arms quietly. He said nothing, but a small smile crept onto his lips. He had seen this before. When the bell rang, Brandon took off like a storm. He threw a testing jab toward her shoulder, not full force, just enough to gauge her reaction. But she wasn't there. In one smooth step, she shifted sideways, her movement so precise it was like she disappeared and reappeared an inch away. The jab hit empty air. Brandon blinked, surprised, but quickly adjusted and threw another, faster this time. Aisha pivoted, her hand lightly brushing his arm as she stepped past him. The motion was effortless. She tapped his back with her fingers. "Tag," she said, a faint smile crossing her lips. The dojo erupted in laughter, but this time not directed at her. It was laughter of disbelief, of surprise, of awe. Brandon's smirk faltered. His ego stung. He wasn't used to being outmaneuvered, especially by someone he thought was inexperienced. He forced a smile. "Lucky move," he muttered. "Let's go again." Aisha simply nodded. He came at her again, quicker, more aggressive. His punches sliced the air. His roundhouse kick whirred inches from her face. But she wasn't there. Every movement she made was controlled, efficient, almost poetic. Within seconds, it became clear to everyone watching. This woman wasn't just lucky. She was trained, deeply trained. Brandon's breathing grew heavier, his strikes sloppier. Aisha remained untouched. Calm, fluid, waiting. Sensei Hiroshi's eyes twinkled. He recognized that patience, the kind only true martial artists possess. When Brandon finally lunged for a grab, Aisha sidestepped again, her motion swift and sure, and before anyone could blink, she swept his leg and let his momentum carry him down. Thud. He landed on his back. The sound echoed through the dojo, bouncing off the wooden walls. Gasps rippled through the students. Aisha stepped back, bowed slightly, and said, "Are you okay?" Brandon blinked, looking up at the ceiling, stunned more by disbelief than pain. His pride had taken a real hit. The students whispered among themselves. Someone muttered, "Did she just drop a black belt like that?" Brandon sat up, trying to hide his embarrassment. He laughed awkwardly. "You got me. Guess I slipped." But deep down he knew he hadn't slipped. He had been outclassed. Sensei Hiroshi took a deep breath, folding his arms. He didn't intervene. He wanted to see what happened next. Aisha stood quietly, waiting. "Would you like to continue?" she asked politely. And with that calm question, a new tension filled the room. One made not of mockery, but respect. Because for the first time in a long while, the dojo's loudest fighter wasn't laughing anymore. A hush settled over the dojo. The laughter from earlier had vanished, replaced by a strange electricity in the air, the kind that made even the spectators hold their breath. Brandon Lee, the dojo's pride, stood back up, brushing invisible dust from his GI. His face was red, half from exertion, half from embarrassment. His eyes darted toward the other students. Some avoided his gaze, some looked shocked, others whispered. He could feel his ego slipping through his fingers, and that only made him angrier. Across from him, Aisha Daniels stood quietly. She hadn't moved much since the last exchange. Her breathing was slow, steady, the kind of rhythm that belonged to someone who was in complete control. Brandon cracked his knuckles, forcing a grin. "All right," he said, "no more play around." Aisha tilted her head slightly. "I thought this was just for fun," she said, her voice calm but piercing. A few students chuckled nervously. Even Sensei Hiroshi, standing off to the side, hid a faint smile behind his folded arms. He had seen many matches in his life, but few where the power dynamic flipped this quickly and this cleanly. The bell rang again. Brandon lunged forward, faster this time. His movements were sharp, well-practiced. A front kick aimed at her midsection, followed by a quick right jab. But Aisha didn't block. She slipped. Her body seemed to melt sideways, evading the kick by a hair's width. Her arm brushed lightly against his wrist as she redirected the jab with a subtle twist. In that split second, her fingertips landed softly on his chest, right over his heart. It wasn't a hit. It was a statement. She could have struck harder, but she didn't. She didn't need to. Brandon stumbled back, blinking. The contact had been gentle, but the precision, the timing, it rattled him. The dojo went silent again. Then came his frustration. He charged again, this time with real intent. His kicks got faster, punches heavier. The air filled with the sharp sound of his strikes cutting through space. But Aisha's body moved like flowing water, adapting, redirecting, never colliding. Each time he attacked, she was already gone. One step to the side, a half turn, a smooth pivot that left him striking shadows. Her movements weren't showy, they were surgical, controlled, efficient. Every time Brandon missed, he grew more desperate. His strikes lost form. His breathing grew ragged. His frustration turned into sloppiness. And Aisha read it like an open book. She ducked under a wild hook, twisted at the waist, and lightly tapped his shoulder, the same way a teacher might correct a student's posture. "Balance," she said softly. "Don't let your anger lead your body." Brandon froze. No one had ever spoken to him like that mid-fight. The dojo students exchanged glances, the kind that said something special is happening here. But pride is a stubborn master. Brandon gritted his teeth, refocused, and tried one last desperate maneuver. He stepped in close, feigned a punch, and went low, sweeping his leg to knock her off balance. It was a smart move, quick, unexpected, executed well. But she was quicker. As his leg swept forward, she read his hips and shifted her weight in a blink. She spun slightly, caught his momentum, and with a graceful motion, used his own force against him. A loud thud echoed as Brandon's back hit the mat again. This time, the impact rattled the wooden floor beneath the tatami. Gasps rippled through the dojo. Some students covered their mouths. One of the younger white belts whispered, "Did she just flip him with one hand?" And she had. Aisha had guided him down using nothing but precise controlled leverage and timing, pure technique. Brandon lay on his back again, chest rising and falling, eyes wide. He wasn't injured, but the realization struck him harder than any physical hit ever could. He'd just been dismantled completely by someone who hadn't even broken a sweat. Aisha stepped back, bowed slightly, and said, "You have good energy, but you're fighting me like I'm your enemy." Her tone was gentle, not mocking. It carried weight, the kind that demanded reflection, not retaliation. Brandon pushed himself up, his pride still fighting to breathe. "You're fast," he admitted grudgingly. Aisha nodded. Speed is nothing without patience. The dojo was dead silent now. Even the sound of feet shifting or clothes rustling had disappeared. Every student's eyes were locked on the two in the center. Sensei Hiroshi finally spoke. "Continue," he said quietly. Brandon exhaled hard, wiping sweat from his forehead. This time he didn't rush in. He circled, studied her, tried predict her. But she didn't move. She simply waited. He lunged again, a clean side kick followed by a sharp hook punch. Aisha blocked neither. She avoided both, one pivot, one sidestep. And before he could reset, her body turned like wind through trees. Her hand caught his wrist, her foot hooked behind his heel, and in one breathtakingly quick movement, she turned her hips. The sound was soft like cloth twisting, and then bam! Brandon hit the mat again, harder this time. His arm bent just enough for her to control him. The entire room flinched. Before he could react, Aisha's knee rested lightly on his shoulder, her hand securing his wrist. She wasn't applying full pressure, but everyone could see, if she had wanted to, he wouldn't be getting up. She leaned close and said quietly, "Yield." The word hung in the air like thunder. For a moment, Brandon hesitated, his pride screaming no, but his body already knowing yes. Finally, he said the two words he hadn't uttered in years. I yield. Aisha immediately released him and stepped back, bowing respectfully. Thank you, she said, her tone humble and sincere. Brandon sat there, rubbing his wrist, looking up at her. The anger in his eyes had melted into something else. Awe. Sensei Hiroshi broke the silence, his voice calm but firm. That, he said, was not a fight. That was a lesson. The students stood motionless, processing what they had just witnessed. Brandon got up slowly and looked at Aisha. Who are you? He asked, genuine curiosity replacing his arrogance. Aisha smiled softly. Just someone who loves martial arts, she said. Her words were simple, but her presence carried weight. The kind of weight that comes from years of discipline, pain, and mastery. Brandon bowed, deeply this time. You've earned my respect. Aisha bowed back. Respect is a first step toward strength, she replied. The dojo exhaled as one, the silence breaking into murmurs of amazement. Even the youngest students understood something that day. Real power doesn't need to prove itself. And as Brandon stepped off the mat, the echo of Aisha's movement, silent, fluid, precise, lingered in the air like a quiet storm. For the first time in the dojo's history, the loudest fighter had been silenced, not by defeat, but by wisdom disguised as grace. The echo of the fall still lingered. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner and the rhythmic sound of Brandon's breathing filled the dojo. He sat on his knees, eyes lowered, sweat dripping down his temple. His arrogance, the playful grin, the cocky stance, all of it had vanished. What remained was something far more powerful. Humility. Across from him, Aisha Daniel stood silently, hands folded, her calm expression untouched by victory or pride. To her, this wasn't conquest. It was a reminder, a lesson written not in words but in motion. Finally, Brandon broke the silence. His voice was low, uncertain. Who are you really? A few students leaned in, eager to hear the answer. They'd seen many fighters before, but never anyone who moved like that. Never someone who could dismantle a black belt with such quiet control. Aisha bowed slightly, her voice gentle but firm. Just a student of the art like you, she said. But before Brandon could respond, Sensei Hiroshi stepped forward, his sandals whispering softly on the tatami. The calm authority in his movement made everyone instantly straighten their backs and bow. He stood beside Aisha, a proud but knowing look in his eyes. Brandon, he said, and everyone else here, you owe her your respect, not just for her skill, but for her discipline. The students exchanged confused glances. Sensei Hiroshi continued, his tone warm but commanding. Aisha Daniels is not a beginner. She is a 6th-degree black belt in jiu-jitsu and a national taekwondo champion. She has trained in Tokyo, Seoul, and Los Angeles. She's taught military self-defense, and last year, she was invited to demonstrate at the International Martial Arts Summit in Kyoto. The room fell absolutely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Brandon's jaw went slack. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. The woman he had mocked, the one he thought was just a beginner, was leagues beyond him. Aisha smiled softly at the stunned faces. Please, she said humbly, titles don't matter. We're all students, always learning. But even in her humility, everyone could feel the weight of her experience. Brandon lowered his head, shame burning behind his eyes. Sensei, I didn't know. Sensei Hiroshi raised a hand gently. That's the point. You didn't ask. You assumed. Those words cut deeper than any strike could. He turned to the rest of the class. Too often, we see strength only in size, rank, or noise. But true mastery, the kind Aisha carries, doesn't announce itself. It waits patiently to be discovered. The students nodded silently, their earlier laughter replaced with admiration. Even the youngest among them seemed to sense they'd just witnessed something unforgettable. Aisha looked at Brandon and gave a respectful bow. Thank you for the match, she said sincerely. You were strong and brave to accept the challenge. You helped teach a lesson that matters. Brandon blinked, taken aback. A lesson? Aisha smiled. That martial arts isn't about defeating someone. It's about defeating what's inside you, your ego, your fear, your doubt. Every time we step on the mat, we fight our own reflection first. Those words landed like poetry, the kind of truth that lingers long after the sound fades. Sensei Hiroshi nodded deeply. She's right. Humility is the foundation of strength. The moment you think you have nothing left to learn, you've already stopped growing. Brandon looked down at his calloused hands, then back at Aisha. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I let my pride lead me. Aisha stepped closer, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. Then today was a good day, she said kindly, because you learned something that took me years to understand. Her smile was genuine, not triumphant, not smug, just human. Something shifted inside Brandon that day. He stood and bowed deeply, a full, respectful bow that came not from obligation, but from the heart. Thank you, Miss Daniels, he said, his voice steady but sincere. The students followed his lead, bowing to Aisha in unison, the sound of their collective movement. 15 bodies bending in perfect respect. Filled the dojo with a kind of reverence rarely felt in a simple training hall. Aisha returned the bow. Thank you, she said, for the respect, and for the reminder that we all start as beginners. Sensei Hiroshi looked around the room, his expression thoughtful. From the day onward, he said, Aisha will assist in teaching here at Osaka Dojo. You will learn not only technique, but patience and humility. The students smiled, excitement replacing their earlier pride. But for Brandon, the lesson went even deeper. As the others resumed training, he sat quietly at the edge of the mat, watching Aisha demonstrate basic moves to a group of young students. She didn't boast, didn't overcomplicate. She broke every move down with patience and grace, explaining not just how to strike, but why they must never strike in anger. She taught them to breathe before reacting, to think before attacking, to bow before and after every spar, not out of formality but gratitude. And as Brandon watched, he realized something profound. She didn't just fight better than anyone he'd met. She understood martial arts in a way he never had. It wasn't about power. It was about purpose. Weeks passed, and word spread quickly through the local martial arts community. People came to watch Aisha teach, curious to see the woman who had humbled the dojo's loudest fighter. But instead of showing off, she spent her time helping white belts perfect their stances, teaching them balance and awareness. When someone asked her why she never entered more tournaments or sought fame, she simply smiled and said, because medals don't make you stronger, character does. Her words traveled to the dojo like seeds planted in quiet soil. And over time, those seeds grew. Brandon transformed. The same man who once scoffed at beginners now helped them tie their belts. He trained harder, but spoke less. He learned to listen before speaking, to bow deeper, to appreciate silence between movements. One evening, as class ended, Brandon approached Aisha as she packed her bag. I used to think martial arts were about winning, he admitted. But now, I think it's about becoming someone worth respecting. Aisha looked at him warmly. Exactly, she said, because the goal isn't to be the best fighter in the room. It's to be the calmest. That night, when the last student left and the lights dimmed, the dojo felt different, quieter, wiser, almost sacred. Aisha stood near the doorway, gazing at the empty mats. She smiled to herself, whispering softly, every fight teaches something, even the ones we don't expect. And in that stillness, where ego had once shouted, respect now spoke louder than any punch or kick ever could. The dojo had gone silent once before in awe of her skill. Now, it stayed silent out of honor, because everyone who trained there after that day knew, real strength isn't loud. It's humble, patient, and kind.